Welcome, everyone. I think we're going to get started. I would expect that we'll probably have more people join us over the next 5 minutes or so. If your calendar looks anything like mine, it's back to back these days. And so people sometimes have trouble getting off the last call. But we are so pleased to have you with us. My name is Matt Dowden. I head up sales and account management at Onit. And I want to introduce kind of the agenda and more importantly, my speakers today. So we'll walk through that in just a moment. We're going to have just kind of a brief orientation to ourselves, our companies, and then dive into talking about two experts in the loop. So the use of AI and third-party bill review in the spend management exercise. You are welcome to submit questions. Probably the best way to do that is to do it in chat. One of my colleagues will be monitoring that for me. And if we have the chance to tuck your question in, so right in context, because that makes sense, we will do it. Otherwise, we'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end. But as your questions or comments occur to you, please go ahead and enter them into the chat, and then we'll make sure we have at least 5 or 10 minutes at the end to address them. And if we can, we'll try to kind of interrupt and interject, because this is very much going to be a conversation between the three of us, and we'd love to have you involved as well. So I am so pleased to introduce two people who I think I can fairly say are friends of mine. I've known Marcy and Jonathan now for something like 15 years. Marcy, as she'll outline in just a moment, runs Sterling Analytics, which is a third-party bill review service and a close partner to a lot of corporates and large insurers, and happily to Onit as well. Jonathan Weber heads up claims optimization and legal operations at Chubb. And just to be clear, he does not use the Onit system, though Chubb is a customer of ours in another capacity. I thought it'd be great to have kind of a broad panel here of really industry experts, and maybe I tagged along in that respect. So let me introduce quickly who we are. Onit serves now over 450 ELM customers, both insurers and corporates, and happily we see both of those, including some of our customers having joined the presentation today. Those of us who founded Onit and who are in its leadership go back in the legal operations space and in spend management, both for corporates and in P&Cs, for about 20 years. I think it's actually my 20th anniversary, having crossed over from practicing law into legal technology this year. So we're pretty excited to be, again, trying to lead the charge into best practice in spend management. We have acquired a number of artificial intelligence assets and are fortunate to have long-standing relationships with folks like Marcy, who I'd like to introduce right now. Marcy, can you tell us a little bit about Sterling Analytics?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. As you know, I love talking about our company because I think we are a real differentiator in the space. We are a legal consultancy. We are comprised of attorney and some paralegals. And what we do as a legal bill review company is we help individuals and companies in the management, review, and auditing of their legal costs. But as you can see by this slide, we do so much more. We are looking at billions and billions of dollars a year, one line at a time. And as attorneys educated across numerous practice areas, our strong suit is that we pair our professionals with our clients' practice areas to validate and to challenge the legal fees by reviewing them against both billing guidelines and universally accepted standards of ethical bill review. And this slide specifically speaks to why the right human team is so integral to have a robust and thriving and respectful relationship between the company we support and the attorneys we collaborate with. And I think that collaboration term is so important when you speak about our company, because we're a values-based company. So in every single way, we lead with innovation and collaboration and integrity and care and respect. And with that space, we're always educating the attorneys that we work with. Jonathan will tell you, but what he likes to say about us is that we quiet the noise. Our approach is one of education, never in an adversarial posture. We are never coming across dictatorial. We are really looking to be flexible and nimble and thoughtful and reasonable in the interaction, because everybody says their clients, their firms are so integral to their day-to-day business, and we respect that, and we make sure that we are human And that's the differentiator for us as humans. We make sure we lead with compassion and integrity in everything we do. So thank you for this opportunity, Matt, to tell you a little bit about Sterling Analytics.
Well, thank you, Marcy. And I think it's true that long ago and far away in another life, I had the pleasure of introducing the two of you. And you could tell us a little bit about Chubb and sort of the scale of the spend management exercise there. And, we'll come, of course, very quickly onto how Marcy and you work together, because I guess I should just quickly say that Chubb is a customer of Marcy's as well, so that, they know each other quite well.
Sure. So folks, there's a lot of numbers on this slide. I'm in claims. I'm not good with numbers. That's sort of the definition of being in claims, right? I will say that as you'll hear in press releases from the chairman, Chubb is the largest publicly traded P&C carrier in the world. You see our product mixes there. We're personal lines, we're commercial lines. About 57% or so is in the U.S. That means about 43% is outside the U.S. We are not a frequency company. Frequency means you have a lot of the same claim over and over, right? Allstate, Geico, they've got 10,000 auto claims in Brooklyn. We don't have that. Our model is far broader in that we do have some smaller claims. We do have some middle-sized claims. We do have huge claims that run the gamut from a workers' comp claim to a securities class action D&O or an aviation claim, right? The World Trade Center claims. We, like every other major P&C carrier, had a significant piece of that. So the point I make in bringing up all those really big numbers is we spend in legal fees every year a number that has a B in it, okay? To do that well, you've got to have process. You've got to have some art to that process. You've got to have a factory that helps manage that process. You've got to sort of run things through. We are paying literally several hundred invoices a day to different law firms. And the key from our perspective is to pay the right amount. The right amount, and we'll talk a lot about right amounts as we go through this. The right amount varies, right? Hopefully, the right amount is exactly the bill that we get. Sometimes it's not. And to do that, we've got to have process to find what parts of an invoice are not right. In our view, and as Matt says, we don't use the Onit e-billing platform or AI at this point. We're using a different provider. To a certain extent, the tool is the tool. There are good tools and there's bad tools. There's Black & Decker and there's Stanley and there's different kinds of tools. But you got to be a craftsman with it too. And part of that is what we do on our side to try to manage it. And part of it is who we choose to partner with. We have been using Sterling Analytics for, I think, about 8 years now as our partner for doing the human components of the bill review. And we'll talk about why and a little bit later on. But it's sort of the message that I'd start with here is in order to manage a flow of invoices the right way, you got to come at it in an organized perspective. You got to be looking at data in an organized way. You've got to have the right combination of technical tools and human tools to get to the right outcome. You can't just make that stuff up on the fly. And if you do, it's not going to work and you'll end up with friction and then you'll end up with law firms that don't want to work with you anymore. That doesn't do anybody any good either. So I don't know, that's kind of how I look at it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I think that's a good segue into what, again, I promise will mostly be a conversation here. As you saw, the thesis, which we pretty strongly believe in, the three of us, both as people and as companies, is that the best practice, not the only approach, but the best practice is to have what we'll call two experts in the loop, meaning, the technology and in the form of AI and the third-party bill review. You might say three experts when you add Jonathan and a customer who's sort of orchestrating all of that in, but he's a fairly humble guy, so he told us to put two experts in the loop here. And so really what we're going to try to talk about today is defining kind of the next generation that frankly Chubb and Marcy have been living for some time right now, of helping with the fundamental business problem to be solved, which I think kind of has three layers to it. In the first instance, and I can say this as having been one of the founding forces of e-billing spend management technology, For many users of many systems, it is still an incomplete solution, which causes them to spend too much time as end users of the invoice poring over all of the flags and inputs that are coming to them. It doesn't come to them in something that feels like an outcome or feels like a recommendation. It comes to them in something that feels like a either poorly organized set of data or reasonably organized set of data, depending, I suppose, on how you've set the system up and who you're working with. But one way or another, it is not uncommon for people to exclaim about how long they're still spending reviewing electronic invoices. And so there's just a problem to be solved for the end user, if you will. Obviously, in the insurance world, that's sometimes claims examiners, sometimes legal, a more diverse set than you see in corporate, but still a problem we want to solve. Second level of the problem, I suppose, is to be sure that you're actually, as Jonathan said, paying the right amount, that the bargain that you have struck with your vendors is being carried out fairly on both sides. And the closer you can get to that alignment ahead of time, Jonathan stated it in the extreme, which is I'd rather the bill just came in the right amount to begin with, because we have driven people into adhering to the bargain rather than having to chase them to the bargain. So there's that piece. And then in order to probably orchestrate both of those things well, there is the more macro level of analytics, which is to say that there's a lot of noise in legal spend. I can remember when I was being trained as a young associate by the partners who brought me up, when we would send out bills to our important customers, we would invariably have a cover letter which explained all the things we were doing to justify the fees that went along with the bill, even though there were descriptions in the paper invoice that went along with it. Invoices are not inherently a particularly strong communication device. And so there is a lot of noise that has to get pulled out about whether the objectives and those things that you decided to set out to do have in fact been done, and how. So there's a lot we can do kind of with analytics and reporting even beyond what appears on the invoice. But if we just kind of focus on the core use case here, which is as Jonathan said, the hundreds of invoices that his organization pays every day, and that full work stream. I mean, clearly there are some basic things that e-billing does pretty well. Rate checking, making sure that the invoices are compliant in the standard, that the math fits, that the hard black and white things or the basic facts are sorted. But just as soon as you get past that level, and I'm going to turn it over to Marcy and Jonathan to talk about this, there are things that e-billing still helps with. There are yet further things that AI can guide attention to. And then there are the yet further gray areas, which are about judgment and decision. And I'll let them speak to how they have organized their resources about that. Marcy, as someone who has a team that's hands into a whole number of e-billing systems, and in this experience generally, can you just give us some sort of comments about where e-billing leaves off in the classic sense and where you pick up?
Yeah, I mean, e-billing is a great tool. Sterling Analytics does lots of review in strict PDF without any e-billing. But the great thing about e-billing is, depending on the flags that are already programmed in, it really will pick up all the basics, the low-hanging fruit. But where my team comes in, obviously, as the slide shows, and Jonathan can speak to this perfectly because he runs such a big program with us, is those black and white decisions in the gray areas. That's where the human element is. And I like to point out, everyone thinks AI is the second coming, but the truth is, a strong rules-based engine, the AI as it stands right now is just a few steps above. We're not talking about, for the most part, an intuitive machine. It's basic, but 2/3 of this is a human and needs a human element. And Jonathan has this great way of actually talking about the basics and what he does and does not want from a human team versus a machine. So I'm going to actually let Jonathan lead with that part, and I'm going to piggyback what he says.
So the quote that Matt didn't put on the last slide, not saying he should have, is the fifth quote is, I don't really want to do this looking at bill stuff. Okay. If we've got a couple thousand people around the world who manage claims, and if you ask those 3,000 or 4,000 people where to put on the list of their top 10 responsibilities reviewing the lawyer's bill, 5% of them might list it in their top 10. You get some that put it at number 11 or 12, and then you get some that wouldn't even think about it. Okay, that's just reality, because their responsibility, their core responsibility, is to manage the exposure to our insureds. That's what they do, and we're hiring good lawyers, and the good lawyers are doing what they do. And many of our folks aren't lawyers, and even if they were lawyers, they don't necessarily view themselves as litigation management guideline professionals or expert bill reviewers. They might be a lawyer who knows how to manage a D&O case, but they certainly might not know how much time should have been charged to do a motion, because maybe they never practiced. So that's what this slide is, right? It's what do we do to take people who aren't equipped, don't want to be equipped, don't have the time, or if they do have the time, are prioritizing properly some other things, and how do we take them out until they absolutely need to be involved, and what do we do in the middle? Okay, what do we do in that middle? So on the left side, and I'm going to use a bad analogy here, and I apologize, but I like bad analogies. On the left side of this is kind of what the machine can do. You don't really need people to validate whether the rate is the right rate, whether it's a duplicate invoice, whether a timekeeper is billing more than 24 hours in a day, right? That's math. The machine can do that math. I point out that sometimes there's an appeal with some of that math, and well, we got to deal with that. We'll get there. That's like when you go to a restaurant, right, and get the invoice, you get the ticket at the end of the night. You're there with 10 people, and you're looking down the restaurant bill, and you're looking at your steak dinner, and it says $26.95, and you're like, no, it's on the menu. It's 24 bucks, right? That's a math error. You don't really need a human being expert bill reviewer to find a math error. Second kind of bill review from our perspective is, did the firm follow the litigation management guidelines? Every company out there has something in writing or unofficial about the way they expect to interact with their law firms. Billing rules of the road. Yours might be complicated. Ours is maybe a little bit too complicated, but I get paid by the word, so I use a lot of words. But it's still prescriptive. If it's 20 pages, it's still prescriptive. This is what we want you to do, and this is what we don't want you to do. Maybe your guidelines say, we don't want a partner to do research. We don't want an attorney to call the court clerk for a hearing time. There's certain things that we won't allow people to do. It's in the guidelines. Well, a machine can help with that. Now, the old school machinery that sort of we've been using until fairly recently, because we are working with an AI solution, is fairly black and white, right? You got a lot of flags, and it looks for a word, and if it sees the word, it puts a flag on the end of the line item. Maybe it's a flag, or maybe it's a mark, or maybe it's one color, or maybe it's another color. So it just does it's sort of a binary, linear, it's there or it's not. And then your reviewer has to kind of figure out, well, is this the right flag? Should it be there or not? That's the old way of doing it. AI can make that better, right? It can use things like natural language processing. It can do things like looking at historical ways of billing for these sorts of activities. And Matt can talk a little bit more about the technology of an AI. I am a claim guy. I'm a lit management guy. I'm not an AI programmer. But what it can do is it can evaluate the line item and the likelihood that that line item is problematic, as opposed to yes or no.
Right? That's a very important word, though. Likelihood. Let's come back to the likelihood.
Right. Yep. Likelihood. Right. And then what it does is it brings that likelihood to a human, and that human can bring their understanding of the guidelines and of the intent of the client. That's Chubb, or at least the customer. That's Chubb. And look at the plain language used and decide to use that information. Okay. It can make the reviewer better. Marcy can talk to this, but I think probably all of us recognize that we're a little bit better after our first cup of coffee than we might be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon if you're reading every line item. I think all of us can understand probably a human being pays a little bit more attention to a 5-hour line item than a 0.2 line item. It's just natural. AIs don't care how big the line item is and don't really care what time of day it is and how much caffeine they've had. So the AI can bring the attention up to the human reviewer of things that maybe the human reviewer may have overlooked. It can make them better. And then you move, oh, let's talk about what that is, right? So you get your bill at the restaurant, you're there with 10 people, and it's got one row on it. That row says food, $500. It doesn't say what food. It doesn't say whether it's got 5 entrees and what the entrees are, how many drinks, how many appetizers. You're like, no, that's block billing. Our guidelines don't allow block billing. We want you to take that back, server, and bring us a new invoice, a new ticket at the end. It has all of the stuff enumerated so we can make sure that it's right. You didn't follow the rules. Give us a regular invoice. And then you get to gray. Okay. And what's gray? Legal work is the only work that I can think of where you pay someone to think. And the evaluation of how much work they did is based on a determination of whether they thought too much, right? Should the 10-page motion have been 12 hours, 14 hours, 24 hours, 83 hours? Somewhere in that range, there's probably a rational answer. And beyond that range, there's probably a situation where there's either human error and the bill's wrong, or alternatively, maybe the timekeeper was doing other things and wasn't quite paying attention and wasn't as effective as they could have been. AI, a machine, a flagging mechanism, can't evaluate how much thinking a human being should have done. And that's really what reasonableness boils down to. Did the amount of work done by the lawyer, is it representative of an appropriate amount of work product? And AI will never know if a particular pleading could have come out of a form book. Maybe most of it came out of a form book. Maybe none of it could come out of a form book. And AI will never know whether the motion for the appeal that has 20 pages worth of facts, where that 20 pages, 18 of it was cut and paste from a memo done by the lawyer to brief the client a month ago. Well, if you give a reviewer access to the materials, they might remember that, wait, I just saw most of this before. There's no reason for them to have billed 25 hours to draft this statement of facts because I know they just did it last month, or they just did it on a previous motion that you did on a related case. And AI can't do that. And that's where you get to gray, right? And in my dumb analogy, you get your meal and they bring the entree over and it's cold and it's not edible. And you tell the server, take this off the ticket. I'm not paying for it. I'm just going to eat the bread. And then the bill shows up at the end of the meal. And guess what? It's still there, right? No machine can tell you whether the meat was edible. You can. And no machine's going to be able to figure out whether it was taken off the bill the right way, but you can. And that's where you really need a human as you get to the right side of this, where you're thinking about how much work did the human being do and did they do too much? Okay. Started with it at the end. I'll probably say it again a little bit later on too. We don't want to have a lawyer told you thought too much. That's by necessity an unpleasant conversation to have. So by the way, you have the fourth component of this. It's not really something that belongs on the slide, but for all three of these, there's an appeal process, right? If it's a math error, if it's a guideline error, if it's a drafting error on the bill, the law firm might have forgotten to put the right rate in. They might have forgotten to put part of what they need to put on the guidelines. They might have, not quite explained the right way what the justification for the amount of work was. So they're going to often want to reply to the reduction. You got to have a human being to respond. Okay. Now that human being can be guided by the machinery, by the flagging, by the scoring mechanisms, and can be armed with information as that appeal comes in. But somebody's got to handle the law firm that says, no, this reduction is wrong, right? And a machine can't do that either. So that's why, in our view, it's the key is to have a good partnership between technology that kind of scales up and provides either the ultimate answer on the left side of the slide, information on the middle part of the slide, or some support to the human being on the right side of the slide.
Guys, I know there's much more to unpack there, but I think it's worth kind of just doubling down on this question of making sure you're tucking in the AI where it can help. So when we set out to build our first models, we were very deliberate to make sure that we were really challenging the AI to look for things that would have been hard for either the rules to find, or frankly, in some cases, because it might be horizontal across many different invoices or data points, things that might have been hard for humans to find. And so I just want to share with you a couple of the first models that we built. Of course, last year, there wasn't a whole lot of travel going on. So we sort of gave the AI a needle in the haystack problem that we knew would require looking across a number of different things, which is that many outside counsel guidelines have policies about when you can bill for your work, the legal services, during travel. And so again, what we're not talking about here is whether you can or cannot turn in your plane ticket. What we're talking about is under what circumstances can you actually do work on the plane and charge for it. And there isn't a UTVMS code for that, I know, because I was on the committee a long time ago. And so the AI has to look across things that would suggest that there was travel going on, and then map it up against the time and the effort. And so when we brought this as one of the things we were going to run in these historic reviews with our customers to test the models, they said, well, you're not going to find any travel, and we're pretty sure we got that all sorted. And without exception, we found 6 figures worth of time that was billed, even in much smaller books of historic spend than Jonathan's, just are very hard to uncover. Now, in many cases, it may well be that time was appropriate, but it was in each case billed in a way that wasn't really compliant as it was articulated with the guidelines. And so through that appeals process, some of this might have been resubmitted in a proper way, but it would otherwise, all of our customers agreed, not been found. Jonathan pointed to just this, billing practice exercise of finding things that are not properly articulated, either bulk block billing or other forms of just bad billing practices. But we also challenged the machine to help us with what's really been a ubiquitous problem from the days of the dinosaurs in e-billing, which is the fundamental question of, is the right staff class doing the right kind of work? And so Jonathan mentioned the partner doing research, but there are 1,000 other examples of you would really rather not see a paralegal charging for what should be office overhead and the work of non-billing staff, et cetera, and following. And of course, most law firms are not going to expressly bill this the wrong way, such that it jumps out in response to a rule. And here again, we very quickly picked up, approaching 7 figures in every single one of the betas that we ran with this historic review of, a quarter's worth of invoices or a year's worth of invoices. That in many cases here, it was just outright things that even if it wasn't going to get stricken, we certainly should be adjusting that down to the associate rate or down to the paralegal rate. And so really what we're trying to do with our AI is make sure that by the time it emerges, it sort of comes out with a PhD and not a high school diploma, so that it is really helping folks like Marcy's team and Jonathan's team and hopefully some of you customers of ours on the phone really increase the lift of where we can find potential savings. And as Jonathan says, drive it to the right amount. I'm just going to quickly cover this over, but there were a fair number of sort of eureka moments with our customers, because again, we were trying to find these things that they might not have seen before. And so I won't belabor the feedback, except to say that the only way we design technology is in close conversation with our customers, so that we're really trying to solve their problem and not just sort of repeat things from the past. I think sort of pulling it all the way back then to this, higher definition of what is the problem to be solved. Jonathan, as you and Chubb, when you sort of chartered the program, help us understand, holistically what you would have seen as the kind of end goals at the top of the house. And then obviously I would want, Marcy to speak to the same kind of strategic vision as well. And then we'll keep it walking from there.
I'll repeat what you said twice. I think I said once. Our goal always is to pay the right amount. Okay, and I can't overstate that. When I either participate in panels or have discussions with other folks or other companies, for whatever it's worth, I always guide by saying this can't be a savings exercise. It's not for us. We don't want to look at it that way. We don't talk about it that way. We don't act about it that way. We actually compensate our review platform and our review team less if they make reductions. Okay, and the reason for that is entirely because of a couple factors. First, lawyers will get paid. Okay, if they feel like they're getting paid a fair wage, they're going to work effectively, they're going to work efficiently, they're going to want the next case. But just like there's lawyers who are more efficient and effective than others, there are lawyers who are less efficient or experienced or effective than others. And if they are not profitable on our program, I'll bet you the best lawyers at any law firm will find somebody else that won't be beating their bills up. Okay, at least they'll feel like they're beating their bills up. And we'll get lawyers who might not be as effective or efficient, and then we'll end up paying more hours anyway. So this is not a savings goal. It's never a savings goal. It's never been one. We will never have it be one, either in the way we talk or the way we act. So what are the considerations that we have? We want a process that gets to the right outcome. Now, the reminder for everybody is, I already said it, our guidelines are pretty robust. Okay, we believe that a key part, for example, of having a good outcome for our insureds is to have our claim people and the lawyers talking. So our guidelines don't let lawyers do a whole bunch of stuff without talking, and they have to put that they talked and got approval in the bill or we don't pay them, right? It's black and white. We've got a review team that's looking at those bills, and every time they see something that requires approval that doesn't document approval was given, they make a reduction. And the law firm has to be able to reply and say, oh yeah, June 3rd, we got approval from Jane Smith. And then the review team reinstates the reduction. So it has to be a collaborative process from us that allows for a certain amount of back and forth, because we are a tough client. I'm not going to suggest that we're an easy client because we want to pay everything. We want to pay the right amount. Now, the percentages, in my view, the percentages that Matt showed on his slide, about 6 to 11%, are entirely reasonable. Okay, because when you start something, it's going to start toward low double digits. It just is. Firms are used to wording things a certain way. They're used to getting away with certain things, not getting away with certain things. You're going to see a lot of reduction. And then you're going to see behavior change. And Marcy's going to talk, I think, about a lot of the collaboration that they do with our firms, because we want firms that are getting hammered to not get hammered anymore. We want to teach them how to bill the right way so they can feel like they're getting the right amount of money for the services they're performing. So we get the best lawyers the next time we call. Okay, that's our outcome. That's our goal, to pay the right amount, and in return to have firms that like working with us, like getting paid quickly by us, and like taking the next case.
So Jonathan, I'm gonna pivot over to Marcy in a minute. Thank you for that, and talk about this collaboration, the relationship. But if you think just about the scale, if we imagine that you're, spending something that begins with a B, I take it that the identified, even if you don't call them savings, areas for conversation are not 7 figures. They are 8 figures, and they might be 9 figures. Yes. Over the life of your relationship in this program. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
Yep, and some of them are in workers' comp bills that the bill might be $600, and right. Some of them would be in securities class action bills, and the submission for quarters of bills might be $2 million. Right. And we have those conversations with big and small, and the reductions are in that kind of range, at least when the bill starts its way through. Sure,
understood. We were saying, what have we identified, even if not every single one of those dollars
yep.
became savings. Well, in the teeth of that pretty engaged business conversation, Marcy, talk to us a little bit about what collaboration looks like and how you try to honor the relationship with the law firm.
Well, I first of all, I love this slide where you're talking about achieving perfect harmony. So I know we're going to get back to that. So I think that huge piece is an integral one here, because everyone talks about how important their counsel is, valued counsel. And a surefire way to make your counsel not want to work for you is to not be collaborative and innovative with the way you speak to them, to not have a human being who's there ready to call, speak to a billing partner, speak to a managing partner, and to explain the ideology of why you reduce the bill, or what they can do going forward to understand how to get paid faster, or what will stop the ping-ponging of an appeals process, to really show them what they need to do in order to give us a narrative that helps us explain what was done, or to come back and really talk about what block billing is and how to break down the narrative so we understand who did what and why. But I think a really important piece here, Matt, that has to be talked about is when Jonathan referred to black and white. We all think that just because we have proper guidelines that scaffold and structure the relationship, then you're home free. That a machine can sort of look at the guidelines and flag what's right and flag what's wrong. But black and white is not black and white. The guidelines can prohibit certain tasks that the AI or just a rules-based engine can flag that aren't prohibited at all once they're actually looked at by a human being. So the AI does a really good job of alerting human beings to what possible issues are. But many times it also alerts us to non-issues. The AI can flag multiple attendance or overstaffing, but once our team reads the line item, we understand why there were multiple timekeepers and why that time is allowable. You know, humans get context. A machine does not. You know, humans understand history and why a case is going forward the way it's going, and a machine doesn't get that history. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, AI is not intuitive. People are. A machine can flag a clerical task, but when the human digs in and reads the line item in context, it may not be clerical at all, or it may be just partially clerical. With overstaffing, an AI engine can flag overstaffing, but a human needs to look at that line and make a determination if the matter was overstaffed, appropriately staffed, or improperly staffed. You know, the difference is an AI engine can read the lines and human beings are reading in between the lines, which is so integral here to have perfect harmony. That's a huge concept. Our lawyers understand what other lawyers are trying to say. Lawyers understand lawyers. And sometimes the lawyers don't say it correctly, but we know what they mean. An AI engine will never say, yes, I know what the lawyer was trying to say. We can. Sometimes they put in the wrong code. We know it's the wrong code, but we've been following the case because our professionals are on the same matter. They're understanding the cadence of the way a case is moving forward. So they know what the lawyer meant. They're able to put in the correct code and then send a message to the lawyer that said, hey, the code was wrong. A machine is never going to do that. But this guideline thought process is huge because if guidelines allow for research for 4 hours, a machine will never pick up 4 hours of research because it's allowed. However, our attorneys know that this was a basic tax issue and that the firm is a boutique tax firm, and therefore there should never be any research allowed. And that's that nuance, that's that critical mass where there is perfect harmony in that AI does pull our attention to things so we can focus and we can spend the time to look at it. You know, 3 tequila a night is not going to affect a machine. You know, that 4 a.m. closed eyes haziness is not affecting a machine. Machine's as good at 9 a.m. as it is at 5 p.m. And those things are really critical to the success of any program, is the combination of that AI and the human being in the loop, the two experts, in not only the black and white areas, but the gray areas. The gray areas are those that really don't even necessarily, in many instances, need a machine. However, it's always good to have. You know, you have to step back and recognize a machine can't solve a problem that it's never seen before. So it's a constant learning process here. A machine is always learning. It doesn't just take a certain aggregate of information and move on. It's a constant learning process. And having a human in that loop to educate the machine makes the machine better, faster, and stronger.
Yeah, that's probably worth my doubling down on. Just the learning piece is, I think most people understand that when you're first putting a model in place, you have it learn so that it knows what to look for and what it's misidentifying, and you're feeding back both of those things so that it is focused on the right things and gathering the right things. But people perhaps don't know is that learning is continuous, right? And it's not just input by those first feeder stock of training, but as the machine is itself corrected by either Marcy's team or Jonathan's team, if we were working with them, it's learning from that as well. And we also, again, try to make sure that it's not just this happening in isolation. So, certainly what we're seeking to carry out is that the rules in e-billing get better and more powerful because they are being influenced by what the AI is able to gather up and in essence feed the rule. And again, that the AI is tucking in around the white space between the rules so that it's not just trying to be a better syllogism that could easily be handled by the rules. So we see those two things in odd sort of ways collaborative as well. And that takes some doing for those two things to speak to one another and actually make each other better. So I think the learning piece is important as a strategy, and it's also just part of how we try to deploy the technology. I want to make sure that, number one, we leave time for questions in a few moments, but also that we just kind of give ourselves a chance. The both of you have been at this for some time. And so while a lot of the rest of the market, I think, is just now adapting technology and AI and even third-party bill reviews in a renaissance, I think. And so there's a lot of folks that are moving for the first time in these two areas. You all have been at it for a while. So certainly happy to hear more about what's impactful today, but also kind of anxious to hear what you believe or hope is around the corner. Jonathan, maybe you could start with something you'd like to build on that maybe you're already doing now, or something that you see as around the corner.
Sure. So using AI to help with bill review is straightforward. It's something that's in place. A variety of folks make it available on different sort of ability levels. That's not what we think AI's sort of holy grail is. There's different stages to get to holy grail, right? One of them might be if you give enough data, and I'll talk about that in a second, but if you give enough data to an AI, when the new case comes in, it ought to be able to predict with some amount of reliability how much the likely total expenses for that case will be, if you give it enough about the old cases and if you give it enough about the new case. That starts to get you a little bit better at sort of predicting ultimate expenses, budgeting. If you do it from our perspective as an insurance company, reserving, that sort of thing, it lets our underwriters do a better job of pricing risks if they know better how much the case is going to cost. That isn't really even holy grail stuff to me. Let's talk about kind of litigation strategy and intelligent recommendations. If you give an AI enough pieces of information, and it's looking at bills at the same time it's looking at the case itself with whatever codes and data, fixed data you can give it, then we think a couple of years from now, an AI is going to be able to look at wording patterns in invoices and say, this billing pattern looks just like these other cases in the past where things went really badly. Pay attention, okay? The fact that that information exists is irrelevant to a human. No human being can process billions of dollars worth of spend and however many different data points along with all of the line items on those invoices and say, okay, we've seen 75 cases that looked like this, and 70 of them, the budget tripled and the total outcome was viewed by the client as horrible. So pay attention to this one before it gets out of the barn. To us, that's holy grail stuff. That's not saving money on expenses. I mean, it will, right? Because if you're forced to pay attention to a case before it goes bad, then you save some money on expenses. But there's lots of insurance companies on this call, and probably all know this. Very few cases get better if you're the defendant. Very few. Okay. You find new stuff, the exposure gets worse, and so do the costs to get to that exposure. So if you can figure out a case is going wrong early and cut off the bleeding because a tool was able to put together all those data points and bring to a human being's attention, it's time to pay attention to this file. We think that changes the loss ratio someday. And that to us is kind of what we're hoping to get to in a couple of years.
Yeah, obviously I'm going to turn to you in just a second, Marcy. It brings to mind, I had seen some of the names of attendees here, and one of them was from a customer of mine from 20 years ago, where we were at that time, not with AI, obviously, enabling what we call pro forma budgeting, so that before we set out to establish the budget collaboratively with outside counsel, why not take a look at what the budgets and outcomes had been on a set of comparable cases, right? So that exercise could be informed by comps. Now, again, that's at the top of the house. I think you're positing the nirvana of being able to do that with pieces, parts of the case, and on a strategic level and at the task level, and that's certainly where this should all go. Marcy, what would you think is working well? What would you like to see happen from your perspective as to AI?
Look, I think AI is definitely the future. There's no getting around it. I think it can make tremendous strides in helping make determinations and really smart business decisions moving forward based on the aggregation of the data that a human being will never be able to actually take in and be able to spit out to make those determinations. So I think that hand in hand, the big picture is where AI is going to make a huge difference in a litigation management strategy and in companies making those very strategic decisions. That's what I'd like to see from AI. I think on a granular level, you have to understand when it comes to speaking to lawyers with regard to their bills, lawyers are savvy. Anything that an AI is going to catch, a lawyer will find their way to get it through a back door to come another way. We have to realize that adaptation will always be there. Reasonableness, no matter how good this machine, any machine will ever be, the reasonableness will never be able to be what a human can. The AI can put things in a big picture way, but a lot are context and content determinable, and a machine is not going to be able to do that. Problem solving, collaboration, innovation, care, respect, compassion. A machine will never be able to bring that to the experience that an attorney has. Negotiation, being able to do a light touch versus heavy hand, make exceptions at the turn of a page, be heavier here, be lighter here, overlook that subject, push with that matter. A machine's never going to be able to do that. So I am a real proponent of seeing how does the AI make the human being better. I think it does absolutely make a human better. I think it can be put into an intelligent recommendation on how they work hand in hand. And that's the way I see the future. I don't think humans have to worry. Their jobs are not going anywhere. Machine will get good. Human beings will get better.
Yeah, Jill, who's our head of marketing here and one of the founders of Onit, sitting right in the room with me, and she had a mantra that goes something like this, which is that AI will never replace lawyers, but lawyers who leverage AI might replace others who don't. And so,
I like that.
So I think there's something there, right? And and part of what I'm just going to credit this to Jonathan, because again, he's pretty humble, he won't say these things, but I do think that a strategy, which has evolved as the one that Chubb has, is a point of differentiation in the market in terms of how it manages one of its, principal expenses, and so maybe it's a competitive advantage. Having been somebody who started in e-billing when we were still gathering up the invoices as we sorted out the lead standard on floppy disks, it'll probably start in some of these ways with litigation. But as it did then in the spend management motion 20 years ago. But we are seeing more and more that there are lots of patterns and signals that you can pull out, and they're not always where you would expect. We have a number of PE firms who are customers in our book of business, and They have huge outside counsel spends, and there are patterns and expectations that are, different in terms of their tasks and in terms of the phases of the process. But there are still ways in which to really leverage technology, well beyond the litigation context. But often it begins there, right? And it sounds like there's a lot going on there at Chubb. Any last thoughts before we open it up to any questions we might have? I don't see any yet in chat, but I'm going to honor the promise that we open it up as well. Parting thoughts, Jonathan?
This is a long runway, okay? For those that think about using AI, you've got to have the data. The data's got to be processed. The AI will get better over time. The more data that it has, the better it will be, especially with the right human folks trying to calibrate it. All of the results that Matt pointed out in a pilot program, they get better. They don't get worse if you've got some diligence and some patience. But you have to be both.
Thank you. Marcy.
Although Chubb is not a company that talks about reductions or cost savings, I will say the majority of our clients do talk about reductions and cost savings. And I will say that the combination of a really good AI plus a human being will always get better savings, because the human element is critical and integral in any proper program, but AI just kind of pushes it over the top. So that's my recommendation, is to really evaluate and look at the AI. I know Matt on it has spent a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort in trying to figure out, like you said, it's not the first to the party, but it's learned from the predecessor's mistakes. And you've had a really good trainer for your AI. And I think that a solid, robust AI program with a group that is constantly educating and reinforcing it is a winning combination.
Agreed, and thank you. Well, I just want to point out that we are pretty serious about proving up our bona fides, not only to our customers with whom we're already very actively engaged, but you'll see appearing in some marketing on our webpage that we will do free historic reviews for prospects to kind of help tease out some value for them, kind of irrespective of whether we ultimately win their business. All of us who are in leadership and on it are, sort of play long ball, right? We've been in the market 20 years already. We'll be in another 20. And so we're trying to kind of help move this market forward, which is why I reached out to people whom I really respect, like Jonathan and Marcy, because I really want to bring the very best thinking forward. And thank you so much to both of you for sharing your thoughts today. I don't think we see any questions in the chat, so hopefully this has touched on most of people's questions. Certainly reach out to us if you'd like to chat one-on-one. And thank you so much for coming today. And again, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Marcy. It's always a pleasure to be working with you. Everyone have a good day. Thanks again.
Thank you.